Hey guys, it's Day here. Welcome back to The Day We Cook. And today we're taking a special trip to a town called Bologna, which is the capital and largest city in the Emilia-Romagna region of northern Italy, located just an hour and a half north of Florence. Bologna is Italy's 7th largest city, and it's famous for its towers, its churches, its lengthy porticos. It's got a beautiful historical center, and it's home to the oldest university in the Western world, known as the University of Bologna, founded in AD 1088. But when it comes to food, Bologna is most famous for its sauce. A lot of Americans would pronounce it as the Bolognese sauce. It's actually known as ragu alla Bolognese, Bolognese sauce, or simply ragu in Italian. And what it is it's a very slowly cooked meat-based sauce. The term ragu originates from the French term ragout, and the French will say it in their French way, and I will not even attempt it because I'll sound like an idiot. But ragu simply means meat, or on occasion vegetables that have been reduced to small pieces and that are cooked over a low heat for a long period of time. So think of ragu as a stew. So today in the kitchen we will be making ragu alla Bolognese with pasta, of course. And I have to say though, it's really important to note that if you were in Italy, you will never find Bolognese spaghetti or spaghetti bolognese. And the reason being is because spaghetti is the wrong type of pasta for the sauce. It's just much too thin and round, and it just doesn't pair well with the thickness of the meat-based sauce. So if you were to see a Bolognese spaghetti on the menu, I can guarantee that you have found that at a restaurant outside of Italy, because you will never find that anywhere in Italy. In fact, the Italians from Bologna, and I think maybe Italians in general, will find spaghetti bolognese an offense to their culture. What the Italians will use with the bolognese sauce is a thicker pasta. It's made from egg and flour. They're ribbons. That's very similar to fettuccine. They're known as tagliatelle, and if you're looking for it in the store, that word is spelled with the G, but because the G meets the L, in Italian, whenever that happens, the G then becomes silent. So pronounced tagliatelle. So tagliatelle bolognese is what you will find in Italy. If you can't find tagliatelle, another alternative is pappardelle and fettuccine. And then if you don't do any of those thick, flat, broad-shaped noodles, then you can go with rigatoni, which is thicker than penne. Any of those types of pasta would pair perfectly with the bolognese. There is much debate over the most traditional bolognese recipe. However, we do know that it originated in the late 18th century. And the first mention of the term alla bolognese appeared in Pellegrino Artusi's cookbook entitled La Scienza in Cucina e l'arte di mangiare bene, which means the science in the kitchen and the art of eating well, which is known as the most famous Italian cookbook of modern times with nearly 800 recipes, and it was published back in 1891. His recipe calls for a combination of veal and pancetta. There's no mention of beef whatsoever. There's also onions, carrots, celery, broth, flour, salt, pepper, nutmeg, and Parmesan cheese. And I believe he also suggested adding a little bit of cream and some sliced mushrooms. And then the Italian Academy of Cuisine decided to register a recipe for the ragu alla Bolognese with the Bologna Chamber of Commerce back in 1982. And their recipe is beef, unsmoked pancetta, celery, onions, carrots, meat broth, milk, tomato puree, a dry wine, whether it be red or white, and salt and pepper. No garlic, no herbs, no spices whatsoever, and they also suggest that all of this is cooked in a pot for at least 2 hours. The Bolognese has become super popular around the world, and outside of Italy, it is a far cry from the original Artusi recipe that a lot of people from Bologna consider it a crime against ragu. But a lot of cooks put their own spin on it, and Bolognese will vary from one to another based on 4 criteria, and that is how much tomatoes are being used, what type of meat you end up using as well. Some people choose beef and beef only, others will have a combination of beef and veal or beef and pork or a combination of the 3. What kind of liquids you choose to also use, whether it be meat broth, wine, or milk, and what kind of herbs and spices you end up putting in the pot. There are so many variations every which way you can imagine, but I'm going to try and stick to one of the most traditional. I'm taking the recipe right out of Marcella Hazan's cookbook. And she was a pretty well-known food writer who has published various cookbooks, and a lot of chefs from around the world consider her the queen of Italian cuisine, and I trust her because that lady was born and raised in Cesenatico along the Adriatic coast. She was pretty much responsible for introducing the public of the United States and the UK the traditional techniques of Italian cooking. So let's get started. So to begin, it's really important to understand that every Italian dish has what is known as soffritto. Soffritto comes from the Italian verb soffriere, which means to saute, and in Italian cooking, before you get the soffritto, you have what is known as the battuto, which is the raw, finely chopped vegetables. And in this case, in Italian cuisine, it's the onion, the celery, and the carrots, and this is what is the battuto while it's raw, and once it's simmering and sauteing in the pot, that becomes the soffritto and the flavor base of the bolognese. So we're gonna get started in chopping up some of the onions here. Make sure that all of your vegetables are as fine as possible. And once you have all of your veggies finely chopped, then that's when you're ready to pop it into the pot. Go ahead and start up my pan and drizzle some olive oil. You can also use vegetable oil. Dump in some butter. This is unsalted butter. You get this nice and sizzling. You can hear it already. I'm gonna add in my finely chopped onions, which is right here. Into the pot it goes. Nice little stir. And we're just gonna cook this for about a couple of minutes. All right, so the onions are nice and caramelized. They're translucent. You can definitely smell them. I'm gonna dump in now the finely chopped celery as well as the carrots into the pot. It goes. So the trio of the battuto, the veggies are all in here in the pot. We're just going to saute them all together. It's very nice and fragrant. The colors look awesome. And we're just gonna let this simmer for a couple more minutes before we put in the ground beef. Add our ground beef. Now, in Italian cuisine with this Bolognese sauce, you can use a combination of beef and pork, or just beef, or veal and pancetta, whatever combination you prefer. Put in my ground beef into the mixture here. And then when you're going shopping for ground beef at the store, you know, you get a variety of different fat to lean percentages. I usually watch what I eat when I'm cooking at home. I like to control what it is that I put in my body, so I'm usually very good about choosing typically 93% lean to 7% fat in ground beef. But because the star of the Bolognese is the meat, they suggest that you go with a beef that is fattier. So they're recommending 85-15. This, what I'm using here, is an 80% lean to 20% fat, because the fattier the meat, flavor the sauce will have. So I'm just crumbling the meat with a fork, just breaking it apart so it doesn't stick, because we're not making meatballs here. So I'm just breaking it all up and integrating this into the sofrito. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add salt and not bouillon. Bouillon, the chicken, the granulated chicken powder is what I usually use in all of my cooking, but because I want to stick to traditional Italian, salt it is. And then of course some black pepper into the meat. Whole milk. I was very reluctant, but it says that it's very imperative that you use whole milk to get that flavor going on. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and incorporate this all in here. It sounds really weird to put whole milk or milk in general into your ground beef and sofrito mixture, but hey, that's what it's calling for. Just letting it simmer and let it do its thing. Now, this is where a lot of recipes will vary depending on who you're eating from, who's cooking, right? Instead of milk, other people will use a broth, either beef or chicken. Others will use wine. I will be using wine as well in just a little bit. Next, a little bit of nutmeg. I don't have nutmeg in my pantry. I should, but I don't. So I'm using ground cinnamon. It's a good substitute, or you could use mace as well. So just about 1/8 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. Here comes the fun part. Wine time. Now you can use a dry red or a dry white. Marcella calls for white. So I'm gonna use some Chardonnay. You can use Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio, but I like Chardonnay, and today's bottle is Clos du Bois, which means enclosed in wood in French. And this one comes from Lodi, California, which is Central California. So just, I don't know, they said about half a cup of wine. Let the wine evaporate. And while it's drinking wine, I might as well have some for myself as well, right? Why not? Cheers. Up next are the tomatoes in its own juice. Right into the pot. Of course, the tomatoes in its juice is what's gonna give that Bolognese a nice deep red color. So the tomatoes are in there and it's coated everything else in the mixture. You're just going to turn down the heat. I had this on a medium high pretty much from the very beginning, but you're just going to turn it down to low and let it simmer as lazily as possible. Okay, and you're just gonna, leave this uncovered and come and check on it on occasion, give it a nice little stir here and there, but otherwise you're just gonna let it do its thing, uncovered, for about 2 to 3 hours. Here's what the sauce is looking like at the 2.5 hour mark. So I'm about to cook some pasta, and remember we talked about the different types of pasta that would pair very well with the Bolognese. Going today with rigatoni, which is very similar in shape to the penne pasta, but it is much larger. And here's what it looks like. So the penne is similar in style, except that as you can see with the rigatoni, it is sliced perfectly straight. Whereas a penne, if you've ever had penne pasta, is sliced at a diagonal, at a slant. It's a wonderful tube-shaped pasta to absorb the sauce because it has a really nice hole where the sauce will be able to travel through and actually not come out. It'll just be stuck right there in the tunnel, which is perfect when you're going in for that bite. Definitely always want to add salt to the water when you're making pasta because A, it gives flavor to the pasta, and 2, salt water boils faster and therefore cooks the pasta faster. Add in my salt, and you don't want to be afraid of the salt. I mean, you can add as much salt as you like, I mean, you know, reasonably, but yeah, just add the salt, and then this is where we will go ahead and pour in our rigatoni into the pot. 12 minutes, that's what it's saying on the packaging for the al dente. So the pasta is not quite finished at 12 minutes. I've turned off the heat. It's just about there, and it has a nice, almost al dente, but not quite, because if you're eating it right now, you can definitely taste the salt, but it will still stick to your teeth. What I do is I'm going to now take my beautiful Bolognese, and I'm going to put it into a fry pan because the sauce has been simmering for 3 hours, so it's definitely ready. But just know that the longer the sauce cooks, the more intensified the flavor. I think 3 hours is quite good enough. We'll probably have told you, maybe your mother told you that growing up, to drain the pasta water. But this starchy stuff is liquid gold. This is what helps the sauce adhere to the pasta. So you definitely don't want to get rid of it. The only time you should get rid of pasta water, you know, like drain it, is when you're making maybe a pasta salad. But otherwise, keep the liquid gold. It is delicious. All right, so I'm just gonna toss the sauce and make sure that it is nicely coated all over my pasta. Plus, I'm finishing off the cooking of the pasta so that I can get that nice al dente-ness to these tubes. It is ready, and I cannot wait. It's just one of those dishes, like the ingredients are super simple, and it's just not a very complicated dish to make at all. The trick to this is time. You have to have patience. It's just a dish that kind of takes care of itself on its own. And oh boy, this looks amazing. I am going to top this off with a little bit of Parmesan cheese, and it is all set and ready to chow down. Guys, the moment we've been waiting for, the best part. After 3 hours, I'm getting the Bolognese to cook and simmer and do its thing in the pots. I've topped it off with all this Parmigiano Reggiano, Parmesan cheese, and it just smells so delicious. It looks fantastic. It is piping hot, and I can see already the rigatoni was a really great choice because now the sauce is deep within the tunnels. Oops. Oh my gosh. This is absolutely delicious. Oh my God. Remember, the longer it sits in that pot over that low heat where it lazily simmers, the more intense the flavor. And boy, that time has paid off. And that pasta is just perfectly cooked. You don't have to finish it off in the fry pan, but traditionally in Italy, as opposed to how the Americans do it, you see, the Americans tend to drain the pasta, And then they serve the pasta on a plate and then top it off with the sauce. Whereas the Italians, they put it on a fry pan and they incorporate this pasta within the sauce and finish off the cooking that way. And I think it makes a world of difference. Tastes so much better. Rigatoni alla Bolognese, pasta alla Bolognese. Definitely a crowd pleaser, even your pickiest eater. You gotta try this today. Buen apetito, and I'll see you next time on The Day We Cook.